Hello everyone, this is Showtime 112. Macchi C.205 was the ultimate achievement in Italian World War II fighter design. Early Italian fighters suffered from lack of power, and the solution was found in a license-built German Daimler-Benz DB601 engine. Macchi modified their earlier C200 for the new engine, and the result was a C202 The airplane had a greatly improved performance, although it still lacked firepower. As the Allied air power grew, Regia Aeronautica required another improvement, and the solution was found in an even more powerful Daimler-Benz DB605 engine. This power plant with the output of 1,475 horsepower was installed in an airframe based very closely on the previous model, and the result was Macchi C.205V, Veltro, or Greyhound. The initial Series 1 still lacked firepower with only 4 machine guns, while the later series had 2 Mauser 20mm cannons in the wings. The first deliveries began in October 1942, but due to various difficulties, only 177 of these fighters were produced before the armistice of September 1943. Despite its qualities, the Veltro couldn't make any significant impact in the fight against the Allies. But World War II was not the final engagement for this Italian fighter. In 1947, Macchi relaunched the production of the C.205 using the surviving components, but also converting some existing C.202s into C.205s. When an Egyptian delegation inquired about a possible fighter purchase, the Italians were able to offer the Macchi fighter along with another similar design, Fiat G55. The Egyptians ordered both models. The total order for the C.205 was 80 examples, most of them reconditioned C.202s. Only 15 of those were delivered before the end of the First Arab-Israeli War, but they were heavily involved in the fighting. 5 of them were newly built models, and 10 were converted C.202s. The airplanes arrived to Egypt in crates. They were then assembled and given a camouflage paint very similar to RAF's Desert Air Force. They were delivered to the No. 2 Squadron based at Al Arish Air Base in the Sinai Peninsula. This unit also operated Spitfires, while another squadron in the same base was receiving Fiat G55s at the time. There are indications that the Macchis first encountered the Israeli Air Force as early as 21st of October 1948. But the first official combat took place on 22nd of December. Israelis launched a major offensive and they were trying to put pressure on Egyptian air bases in Sinai. 2 Israeli pilots, Rudi Augarten and Jack Doyle, were on an armed recon mission over Al Arish in their Spitfires. Both were World War II veterans. Augarten flew P-47 Thunderbolts and was credited with shooting down 2 German aircraft. Doyle flew Spitfires for the Royal Canadian Air Force and was credited with victories against 4 Axis aircraft. Augarten spotted a dark shape through the noonday haze flying near the Egyptian airbase. This wasn't a Spitfire, and Israeli pilots knew that Egypt had introduced new Italian fighters. One of them was in the traffic pattern at El Arish, about to land. Augarten placed himself behind the Egyptian fighter and opened fire. The engagement was over quickly. Flight Lieutenant Shalabi Al-Hinavi was seriously wounded in his head and legs, but still managed to crash land his Macchi fighter near the runway. Unlike the Egyptian pilot, the anti-aircraft gunners were not caught by surprise and they opened fire at Algarton's Spitfire, which stayed fast and low until well clear of the base. Algarton was credited with a kill of a Fiat fighter. Israeli pilots would often confuse the two Italian types, and in most cases they refer to them as Fiats, even though Egyptians use the Macchi fighter much more frequently. The next day, 23rd of December, saw an Egyptian attack on Israeli Tel Nof airfield. Several C.205s participated along with some Spitfires. The attack was unopposed by Israeli fighters, but other than that, no other details are known. December 28, 1948 saw the next clash between Egyptian Macchis and Israeli fighters. Two Israeli Spitfires flown by Jack Doyle and Gordon Levitt encountered a number of Egyptian C.205s and a single Spitfire over Gaza Strip. Levitt was the only English non-Jew who joined the Israeli Air Force in the Independence War. Both sides apparently overclaimed in the dogfight which developed. Israeli side was credited with 3 kills, Jack Doyle with a Macchi and Gordon Levitt with a Macchi and a Spitfire. Egyptian side claimed downing of 2 Israeli aircraft with 2 others damaged. One of the damaged aircraft was supposedly an Avia S-199. Egypt admitted the loss of 1 Macchi flown by pilot officer Abed Fattah Said, whose aircraft crashed into the sea. It seems like there was only one certain kill in this battle, the Macchi flown by pilot officer Said, who was shot down by Doyle. Israeli records don't indicate that any of the Spitfires were damaged, and no sortie by S-199s was taken on that day. On 30 December, 2 Macchis flown by Egyptian No. 5 Squadron Commander, Squadron Leader Kamal Abd al-Wahab, and Flight Lieutenant Khalif al-Arusi attacked Israeli ground positions at Abu Agela in the Sinai. But as they were circling low over the encampment, they were bounced by 2 Israeli Spitfires flown by Jack Doyle and John McElroy. Just like Doyle, McElroy was a World War II veteran who had flown for the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was credited with 11 victories against the Luftwaffe. Jack Doyle approached one of the Macchis and opened fire from about 200 yards. The Egyptian Macchi started trailing smoke and soon dropped off towards the desert. John McElroy attacked the second Macchi as it was pulling away from a strafing run. But this Egyptian pilot demonstrated serious skill and aggression. He managed to evade McElroy's fire and after some maneuvering, placed himself on the tail of Jack Doyle. McElroy fired a long burst at the Macchi, which then turned back into his Spitfire. The pair initiated a high-G dogfight. Despite the obvious skill of the Egyptian pilot, McElroy was able to work his way behind the Macchi's tail. He opened fire and his hits sent the Egyptian fighter into an uncontrolled dive towards the desert. Neither of the two Egyptian pilots survived the encounter. Again, Israeli pilots reported fighting Fiats instead of Macchis. Doyle and McElroy were surprised by the skills and aggressive attitude of the second Egyptian pilot, something which they generally didn't demonstrate. This led to speculation of Egypt hiring ex-Luftwaffe or even American pilots to fly for them. But these speculations were never confirmed, and it is now believed that all of the Egyptian airplanes were flown by Egyptian pilots. On December 31, 1948, 3 Israeli Spitfires were sent to attack the Egyptian airfield at Bir Hama. They were flown by Danny Wilson and 2 South African pilots with the last name Cohen, Sid and Jack. Wilson, whose full name was Clifford Denzel Wilson, was yet another non-Jewish Canadian pilot with World War II experience. He had been credited with downing 2 Luftwaffe aircraft. The 3 Spitfires were supposed to bomb the Bir Hama airfield first, and then strafe it if they could find any lucrative targets on the ground. As Wilson was in a dive aiming for the hangar complex, he spotted a silhouette of an aircraft at about 2,000 feet. He dropped his bombs and zoomed up to check on the intruder. He identified it as a Fiat, which was another misidentification as the airplane in question was a Macchi C.205V, whose pilot was returning from a sortie unaware of the Israeli attack. Wilson fired several short bursts, and the Macchi went into a spin with the pilot bailing out successfully west of the airfield. Sid Cohen made one strafing pass at what looked like a damaged Macchi in the western side of the field. Jack Cohen and Wilson also made one pass each at the same damaged airplane. On his second pass, Sid Cohen attacked another C.205 which was taxiing to take off. An Arab source says that two pilots, Mustafa Kamel Abed Wahib and Halaf Arusa, were shot down and killed as they were trying to take off in their Macchis, while the Macchi claimed by Wilson was possibly damaged. Some sources say that Danny Wilson shot down another Egyptian airplane while returning to base, a Spitfire that was escorting a C-47 dropping supplies to the garrison in the Fallujah pocket. The Egyptian Spitfire noticed the attacker and tried to turn. Wilson was still able to achieve hits with a single long burst. But Aloni's Israeli Air Force operations in the 1948 war doesn't mention this second kill, and it states that Wilson was only awarded one kill, that of a Macchi, or as it originally said, a Fiat. The next encounter between the Egyptian Macchis and Israeli fighters came on 5th of January 1949. At that time, it was reported that Egyptian Air Force pulled out of their bases at Sinai, but they were still attacking Israeli positions. A mixed formation of an Israeli Spitfire flown by Seymour Feldman and the Mustang flown by Boris Sr. took off at about 11 a.m. on an armed reconnaissance mission. Boris Sr., the flight leader, was South African. Seymour Feldman was an American who had volunteered to fly for the RAF during World War II. He shot down 10 V-1 rockets in his Hawker Tempest. The mixed Israeli pair patrolled between Abu Agheila and Rafah on the coast, experiencing fire from ground units. As they approached the coast, they spotted 3 Macchi fighters who were attacking Israeli ground positions outside Rafah. Although the sun was behind him, the Egyptian pilots noticed the Israelis as they were approaching. 2 of them turned back to engage the Israelis, while the leader turned away and escaped towards Egypt. Boris Sr. made a pass on the Macchi number 3. He was able to achieve hits, and he witnessed the enemy airplane diving and pouring smoke. The Egyptian pilot that confronted Seymour Feldman was the most capable of the 3. The 2 fighters went into a hard-turning dogfight. Feldman achieved some hits with a high deflection, but the Macchi still kept turning tightly. Feldman made a head-on attack and then noticed his flight leader attacking the Egyptian aircraft too. The Macchi pilot turned away towards Senior, and the Israeli pilot apparently achieved hits. The Macchi started pouring smoke and began to dive towards the desert. Israeli Air Force awarded each pilot with a kill, although this was in fact a single shared kill. Another Macchi was declared a probable kill as Senior never saw it crash. The final action for the Egyptian Macchis took place on 7 January 1949, the last day of the war. 2 Israeli Mustangs flown by Boris Sr. and Jack Doyle escorted 5 Harvards on a bombing mission over Deir Bala. The 2 Mustangs remained on patrol between Rafah and Aouja. They spotted 6 fighters at low altitude. Boris Sr. dived on the formation, which he first identified as Spitfires, but he was sure they weren't Israeli. He approached the last airplane and fired several bursts at it. Senior noticed his victim smoking and then pulled up. He attempted to contact his wingman, Jack Doyle, with whom he lost the visual contact but received no reply. Jack Doyle also attacked the Egyptian formation. He achieved hits on one aircraft and saw it pouring smoke. Doyle then found himself in the Egyptian formation, but he was able to attack another aircraft which also started pouring smoke. He disengaged and eventually met his leader near Rafah. Neither of the Israeli pilots saw any of their victims crash, but they were awarded a kill each. Senior of a Spitfire and Doyle of a Fiat. The airplanes were in fact Macchi C.205s. The First Arab-Israeli War ended that day, but deliveries of remaining C.205s to Egypt continued. On 18 September 1949, an Israeli paramilitary organization planted bombs in the Macchi factory hangar in Italy. 1 C.205 and 3 light planes were destroyed, and some other 205s damaged. This, however, didn't affect Egyptian deliveries as their airframes were in another location. In 1950, a visiting technical team from Macchi noticed that 26 examples of the type were still in service in Egypt, including 4 of the original combat veterans. Soon after that, the C.205 in Egypt was relegated to advanced fighter training role, and they were retired by the end of 1950s. The Italian fighter in Egyptian service flew many combat sorties and apparently achieved some success in providing ground support. But when facing Israeli fighters flown by experienced World War II veterans, they were always on the losing end. Don't forget to press the like button if you liked the video. Join our Patreon supporters or donate on PayPal to keep the channel in business. Thank you and keep watching Showtime 112.